And we're quite surprised sometimes by the end of our program, we have our guys literally sobbing because they're so happy about having found that community and feeling like, I felt really alone. I felt really isolated, but because of Summer House, I felt more empowered and excited about school. And so the power of community and convening and coming together is just so important, especially for those who are underrepresented and marginalized a lot of times at these schools.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Inspiring Teachers, the Honored podcast, where we shine a spotlight on life-changing teachers across the country. I'm Hannah, your podcast host, and our podcast is brought to you by Honored, which is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to honoring and elevating great teachers nationwide. Our mission is to inspire and retain great teachers, keeping them in the classroom as long as possible. Every month of the school year at Honored, we select an exceptional educator in the United States to be the recipient of the Honored National Teaching Award. Each honoree, as we call them, receives a $5,000 cash reward, and we then tell a story on our website and our social media platforms of how that teacher has impacted their students' lives. To learn more about our organization, you can go to our website at honored.org. While you're there, if you have a teacher you would like to recognize, you can nominate them for our Honored National Teaching Award at honored.org/nominate. We are so excited to have you listening in on another Organizational Spotlight podcast episode. Today, we are joined by Vincent Cobb, the CEO of Summer House Institute. Summer House Institute is a national organization committed to inspiring, developing, and growing the next generation of Black and Latino male educators in U.S. public schools. Vincent Cobb is responsible for working with program partners in major school districts across the country to advance racial equity, diversity in schools, and creating better access pathways for high-quality Black and Latino male leaders to stand in front of classrooms. An award-winning educator and community leader, Cobb has been recognized by Camelback Ventures, Education Pioneers, New Schools Venture Fund, Echoing Green, Nation Swell, and BME Community Fellowships, as well as the Knight Foundation as a top education leader, energizing thousands of teachers and school leaders through the first ever National Black Male Educators Convening, attracting over 1,100 attendees every year. To start our episode off, you'll hear from Vincent, who shares more about Summer House Institute. At its core, Summer House Institute's mission and vision are to provide young men of color a pathway into the teaching profession. Through their fellowship program, they provide community and learning opportunities to prepare these young men for careers in the education sector.
Summer House Institute is a Black and Latino male undergraduate fellowship program where we work with young men who are aspiring to teaching careers. And the way we go about that is we work with college campuses in our chapter regions, which is in Philadelphia and Houston. And we spread the word about the importance of representation in schools, especially for Black and brown young men and all students. And so we know that the statistic is nationally Black men make up less than 2% of the U.S. teacher workforce. And that alarming statistic has profound impact on the learning experience of all students, including young Black men who often we find are really left behind in the system and fall through the cracks. And so we want to increase that number. And so we do the work of really just talking about the activism and the social justice and the revolutionary aspect of what it means to be a teacher and impact the lives of the next generation of young people that are coming up. And so we have a 6-week fellowship program during the summer where it's almost like a boot camp around the education landscape and ways to become a teacher and pathways into the profession. And we follow them throughout their freshman to all the way senior year in undergrad and hopefully get them to get their certification and get placed at one of our school district partners in one of their school buildings. And so that's our work, just increasing the number of Black and Latino male teachers in the pipeline.
Reflecting on the history of Summer House Institute, Vincent expands more about how the organization came to be. Co-founded with his best friend, Rashid Coleman, Summer House Institute was created out of the necessity for community and representation of young Black male educators across the country.
Summer House really started out as an organic idea. At the time, my best friend, Rashid Coleman, who was also co-founder of Summer House Institute, we were roommates. So we were both Black male educators in school buildings at different schools, and we would talk about some of the pressures that you face being the sole Black male teacher in a school building, sometimes being seen more as a disciplinarian than really valued for your academic expertise. Sometimes the isolation, the disenfranchisement that you feel, the lack of professional development and investment sometimes from schools because they just feel like, you wear so many hats in a school building. And we wanted to really just have a larger conversation with other Black men to find community. And so we reached out to a group that was a mentorship group that was already meeting up of young Black educators. And we decided to pitch this idea around starting a convening where we would just collect information and have conversations and dialogue about the importance of our representation in schools, but also the support that we need from our school leaders. And so what started out as a conversation amongst 17 guys grew to 100, then grew to 750, and to ultimately 1,500 attendees across the country in a ballroom in downtown Philadelphia talking about representation. And it was then that Rashid and I were kind of catapulted into the national spotlight among funders, among school leaders, among superintendents, that we were going to be the one to lead the charge around this idea of increasing Black male representation in schools. We did not seek it out. We didn't know that even this world of social entrepreneurship existed where we could focus on this issue. But it wasn't until we started to get the millions of dollars invested into our plan and our idea and our leadership that we began to build a nonprofit organization organized around this idea of representation and our mission to impact our schools in the country.
Behind us all is a story of a teacher who had a life-changing impact on us. To share who inspired him, Vincent tells a story about his 7th grade social studies teacher who left an unforgettable impact on him and continues to be a foundational reason behind the work of Summer House Institute.
I recall Mr. Brian Freeland, who was my 7th grade social studies teacher. He was a Black male who really inspired me. I've had incredible parents my entire life, been married for over nearly 40 years. I'm the oldest of 4 and had a very good home. And my dad is a phenomenal father figure in my life. But it was just something additional about having a mentor in the school building that made me take my education more seriously. I was truly captivated and inspired by him. All of my classmates who also had the honor of going through his class have many stories about Mr. Brian Freeland and his unique approach to teaching social studies, also just empowering the learner. And so I've always been a huge fan of his, and I didn't realize it until later in my life when I went to college that I could have the same impact that he had on students that he had on me. And if I had known that earlier, I think I'd have been just as passionate about becoming a teacher to begin with. And so when I actually had the honor of working at a Upward Bound program at Lemoyne College in Syracuse, New York, and where I was doing a summer program for high school students. And I had the honor of managing like 40, 50 Black and Latino young men. And it wasn't until after that experience that I realized the impact that Mr. Freeland had on me, that I can have the same impact on those students. And so by the end of that summer, I was convinced. I wanted to go back to school, change my major, and I wanted to become an educator. I wanted to become a superintendent. I want to impact school systems, just like Mr. Freeland did.
Through Summer House Institute's podcast, The Power of Exposure, they share incredible stories about the fellows in their program. In our conversation with Vincent, he shares a story from this podcast that highlights the power of recognition and exposure. This story centers around one of their young fellows, James Williams, a teacher in Houston, whose life has been forever changed through the Summer House Institute's fellowship program.
We have a podcast that we call The Power of Exposure, and it's really a collection of stories and just reflections of our Summer House Institute fellows, those who have gone through our program. And I think one of the most profound stories I heard is from James Williams, who is a teacher in Houston. I remember listening to his podcast, and really it was just supposed to be a reflection of his 6-week experience at being inducted into Summer House Institute and into our summer fellowship program, where they get to live together on a college campus with 25 other fellows, and they get to live, learn, and work together, which means they go to schools in that community and they actually volunteer as teacher assistants, and they actually get hours where they have time in school buildings. They also have a capstone project, so an academic project that they work on together throughout the summer. And I recall his experience in being selected for Summer House Institute. And I think one of the most profound things he said was he had never been chosen for anything. And he remember getting that acceptance letter from Summer House Institute, and he cried with his mom because he felt like, something has finally chosen me, so I'm going to choose this field. And so how many other young men really are just waiting to be chosen, waiting to be acknowledged, that we could deputize into this work, who can have profound impact on school systems, all because we just really just recognize them. It's just the power of recognition and the power of that exposure creates an opportunity for us. And a lot of times when we talk to school leaders or university leaders, they say we can't find Black and Latino young men who are willing to teach. Well, that's just not true. We know that to not to be true. And I know sometimes it's the face that is kind of recruiting that sometimes can be a barrier because they don't see somebody that looks like them really in the field. And you don't think as a young Black or Latino male that the same school system that I probably had bad experiences in, I can go and make an impactful change for the next generation so they don't go through the same things I went through. So hearing James' story just really made me feel great that this is great work. This is great soul work. This is great work that empowers young men to see themselves differently through the lens of the investment that we provide. And so that will always be memorable to me just at the onset. And so when I go out to recruit, when I talk to staff about recruiting, I talk about the power of recognition and just seeing someone who is just waiting to be recognized by them to really make a change. And now James is doing great, incredible work, one of the best teachers in his school district. And so those are the kind of stories that we want to hear, because those are the type of investments that we wait to really see true outcome for students in school communities.
Through their fellowship program, Summer House Institute has seen incredible outcomes and success for young male teachers of color. From improved teacher certification pass rate to college and program retention rate, it is clear that their work is invaluable and life-changing. By fostering a community for Black and Latino men, Summer House Institute is cultivating an environment of unity, belonging, and a commitment to education.
We're very proud of the outcomes of our program. Right now, we have over an 80% pass exam rate, and that outpaces the national average, especially for teachers of color, and passing the certification, which is sometimes the hardest and most difficult part of the pipeline, where we see a lot of young Black men exit the teacher pipeline. We also see a high retention rate. Mostly over 90% of our guys return and finish college, which is one of the highest risk demographic of dropping out of school are Black and Latino young men in college institutions across the country. And then our program return rate, we have high satisfaction in terms of their learnings and those who actually convert to become teachers. So our work really, we don't try to look for those who are already excited about becoming teachers. We like to talk to the guys that are not quite sure, never really explored it, never really tapped into the idea. But what we find is that they find community with Summer House Institute. It's almost like a fraternity, a brotherhood. And so for first generation college students who are trying to navigate their way through an unfamiliar space, especially at college, when you find this group of guys who are inspirational, empower one another, who've had these experiences during college, you become more committed to one another. And that has in turn committed them more to the idea of teaching and becoming educators. We're quite surprised sometimes by the end of our program, we have our guys literally sobbing because they're so happy about having found that community and feeling like, I felt really alone. I felt really isolated, but because of Summer House, I felt more empowered and excited about school. And so the power of community and convening and coming together is just so important, especially for those who are underrepresented and marginalized a lot of times at these schools. And so we're very proud of those statistics. We're very proud of those outcomes. It's something that we want to continue to develop to one day become a national apprenticeship program that's recognized by the state for Black and Latino young men who are on a trajectory to becoming our next generation of educators.
Research shows that when students see themselves reflected in their educators, it changes their lives. Not only does the representation of Black and Latino male educators support students with similar backgrounds, but this representation impacts all students, contributing to stronger and more successful school communities.
There's so many great statistics out there regarding the impact of teachers of color, also just generally Black male teachers. Students are 13% more likely to go to college if they've had a Black male teacher between the grades of pre-K to third grade. There's also other statistics out there that says suspension rates go down, the labeling of students sometimes, which is often misunderstood behavior, and they actually have decreased because of Black male teachers that have been in school buildings who understand their students and come from similar backgrounds that they come from. There's also statistics that show that schools and school communities are better because of the impact of Black male teachers and the kind of unique perspective that they add to the school culture. So there's it's a growing body of research, and more research needs to be done for sure. But for so far in the early stages of national research, they're seeing the positive impacts and positive returns in investing in a pipeline where we see more educators of color and namely more men of color in the field.
Diversity in education creates inclusive environments where everyone feels welcome. Welcoming diverse backgrounds where Black and Latino men can share their lived experiences helps communities thrive. Through cultivating the skill sets of and paving the future for these men, Summerhouse Institute's work is combating negative stereotypes and challenging individuals' internal bias throughout the education field.
I think sometimes holding that perspective and lived experience is so important as a staff member or part of a school building, because not only do you share that amongst how you are professionally developed in that school building, but how you interact with parents, how you interact with students, what your level of understanding of community and the challenges that they face, not as a deficit, but as an asset that you can really leverage so that you can create a more inclusive environment where everyone feels welcomed. So I think it's critically important that we know that Black and Latino men hold a unique perspective because of their lived experience, and we should welcome that in these spaces because it shows not only does it help school communities thrive, but it also impacts student achievement greatly across the board. And not only are Black male teachers and Latino male teachers good for students of color, they're also good for white students because they get to combat the negative stereotypes that we often see in media. Sometimes the generational kind of stereotypes that are carried on through families. Sometimes our own internal bias that we don't even realize exists within ourselves. One thing that we emphasize in our training, even with our Black and Latino male teachers, is that they have their own implicit bias about their own communities sometimes when they walk into these school buildings. So it's our job as Summerhouse Institute, as an organization, as an institution, to challenge that so that we don't become really filtered or kind of polluted with the fog of racism and sometimes the anti-DEI culture that we're seeing grow, especially in the times that we live in right now. So very critically important to welcome that unique perspective and that lived experience into these school environments.
At Honored, we know that teacher recognition is a critical part of lifting up the education profession. In our conversation with Vincent, he shares more about the power of recognition and investment in teachers. Celebrating the impact teachers have on the lives of their students and recognizing the challenges they face are key to improving teacher retention and recruitment.
Teaching is a tough job, and I always say not everybody is called to do it. So I think a lot of times it gets a bad name, and a lot of times it doesn't get the proper investment. Our teachers need to be paid more. Our teachers need to be valued more. And I think it starts with recognition. I think just the power of recognizing the hard work that they do every day, being underpaid, being under-resourced, understaffed, having to wear multiple hats, trying to make up the gap. And they make a career of this. There's teachers that have been teaching for 30 years under some harsh conditions, and they still make it an opportunity to uplift and use whatever resources they have in community to really move students along to what their destinies are. And I think we as a country if we value K through 12 education, we need to make the proper investments to make sure that is strong, that we're competitive. But I think it starts with organizations like Honored, who are doing the work of recognizing them, and Summer House Institute, and what we seek to do, and really choosing them to say, hey, we think you would be an incredible teacher. And here's our resources that we can provide to make sure that you are the absolute best. And, it's not only about choosing teachers because of the color of their skin, but it's about choosing highly effective, highly skilled teachers and knowing that they have that potential. That is what we work and want standing in front of our students, in front of classrooms every day.
Thank you so much for listening and joining us today to learn more about Vincent Cobb and Summer House Institute. To learn more about Summer House Institute, you can visit their website at summerhouseco.org or click the link in the episode description. If you enjoyed today's episode, you can follow us and leave us a review on whatever podcast platform you're listening in from. Thanks again for listening, and make sure to tune in again later this month to listen to another Organizational Spotlight podcast episode.